My name is Annalise, and at 65 years old, I never thought I would be sitting alone at my only son Jackson's wedding reception, watching him dance with his new bride. When Tiffany suddenly stopped, the music pointed directly at me and screamed those words. I felt my heart shatter into a million pieces. I clutched my purse tightly, feeling the outline of the check inside. My son never even looked up. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from. And hit that subscribe button if you want more true stories about finding strength when family betrays you. I raised Jackson all by myself in our small Connecticut town after my husband William walked out on us when our boy was just 4 years old. It was just me and my little guy against the world. William decided one day that family life was too constraining for his dreams of becoming a musician. He packed his guitar and his denim jacket and left without even saying goodbye to his son. The child support checks came sporadically for about a year, then stopped completely. As a high school math teacher, my salary barely covered our basic needs. I took on extra tutoring jobs in the evenings and weekends, sometimes working with 3 or 4 students back to back at our kitchen table, while Jackson colored quietly in the living room. During summers, I worked at the local community college teaching remedial math classes. Every extra dollar went into Jackson's college fund. Jackson was such a sweet child growing up, bright as a button with those big brown eyes that could melt your heart. He was sensitive sometimes, too much so. I remember when he was 7 and the neighbor kids didn't invite him to a birthday party. He tried so hard not to cry, biting his lower lip the way he always did when he was upset. That eagerness to be liked, to fit in, worried me sometimes. He could be so easily influenced by stronger personalities. We were exceptionally close throughout his childhood. Every night we had what we called our special time. No matter how tired I was from teaching and tutoring, I would sit on the edge of his bed, and we would share our highs and lows of the day. On weekends, we would go hiking at the state park or visit the free museums on their community days. I made sure he had everything he needed emotionally, even when finances were tight. His middle school years were challenging, as they are for most kids. Jackson started becoming more aware of what others had that we did not. One Christmas, he desperately wanted the newest gaming system that all his friends had. I picked up extra tutoring hours for months to save for it, eating nothing but ramen noodles many nights after he went to bed. The look on his face Christmas morning was worth every sacrifice. High school brought new challenges. Jackson started caring more about brand name clothes and fitting in with the popular crowd. I sewed name brand patches onto discount store jeans and learned to shop clearance racks at the end of each season for the following year. He was a good student, though not exceptional. I pushed him to join the debate team, knowing public speaking skills would serve him well later in life. The day the acceptance letter from State University arrived was one of the proudest of my life. We danced around the kitchen, Jackson lifting me off my feet even though I told him to put me down before he hurt his back. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table after he went to bed, staring at the financial aid package. Even with his partial scholarship, we were still $30,000 short for 4 years. I made an appointment with my retirement advisor the next day. During college, I noticed subtle changes in Jackson. His calls home became less frequent. When he did call, he talked more about parties and social events than classes. He joined a fraternity his sophomore year, something I worried we couldn't afford, but he insisted it was important for networking. I picked up even more tutoring clients to help cover the fraternity dues. He graduated with a marketing degree and immediately moved to Chicago for a job at an advertising firm. I was so proud but also heartbroken to see him move so far away. Our daily calls became weekly, then monthly. When he did call, he would talk about his colleagues, the restaurants they frequented, and the nightlife. Everything seemed to revolve around appearances and impressing others. 6 months after his move to Chicago, Jackson called to say he was bringing someone special home for Thanksgiving, Tiffany. Even her name sounded elegant and sophisticated. I spent days cleaning our modest home, knowing it would be scrutinized by city eyes. I prepared all of Jackson's favorite foods and even splurged on new guest towels for the bathroom. When they arrived, Tiffany was even more polished than I had imagined. Tall and slender, with perfectly highlighted blonde hair and a designer handbag that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her handshake was firm but brief, her smile never quite reaching her eyes as she glanced around our living room. Throughout that weekend, I noticed how she would touch Jackson's arm when she wanted him to stop talking, how she would interrupt his childhood stories with comments about their life in Chicago. The subtle ways she would redirect conversations to topics where she could shine. When Jackson showed her his old bedroom, I overheard her whisper, "What a quaint little room. Did you really grow up in this tiny space?" More concerning was how Jackson changed around her. My son, who once talked excitedly about ideas and dreams, now talked about connections and appearances. He mentioned restaurants where the minimum cost for dinner was $200. He talked about weekend trips to New York City like they were routine excursions, rather than the luxury they were to someone like me. When Tiffany commented on how simple and rustic our Thanksgiving dinner was, compared to her family's catered affairs, Jackson looked embarrassed, rather than proud of the homemade meal I had spent days preparing. He quickly changed the subject to their plans to attend a wine tasting event the following weekend, something he knew I could never afford to do. As they were leaving that Sunday, Tiffany hugged me stiffly and said, "Your home is so authentic, Annalise. It must be wonderful not to care about keeping up with trends." In that moment, I saw what was happening. My son was being pulled into a world where appearances mattered more than substance, where the simplicity and love that had defined our life together was something to be ashamed of rather than cherished. That night after they left, I sat in Jackson's empty bedroom and cried for the first time since his father left. Not because I was jealous of Tiffany or because I didn't want him to be happy. I cried because I feared my son was losing himself in his desire to belong in her world. Christmas arrived just a month after that Thanksgiving visit. Jackson called to say they would be spending the holiday with Tiffany's family in their lake house in Michigan, but would stop by for dinner the day after Christmas. I tried not to show my disappointment. It would be our first Christmas apart. I decorated our small house anyway, putting up the handmade ornaments Jackson had created throughout his childhood. I baked his favorite cookies and wrapped the sweater I had saved for months to buy him. When they finally arrived the day after Christmas, they stayed just long enough for dinner before announcing they had to get back on the road. As they were preparing to leave, Jackson suddenly took Tiffany's hand and cleared his throat. "Mom, we have some news." Tiffany held out her left hand, revealing an enormous diamond ring that caught the light from every angle. "We are engaged." I was stunned into silence for a moment. My son, my little boy, who used to fall asleep with his head on my shoulder, was getting married. I hugged them, both tears in my eyes, genuinely happy for Jackson if this was what he wanted. But I couldn't help noticing the size of that diamond. On his junior advertising executive salary, that ring must have cost at least 6 months of his income. I remembered the vintage ring my mother had left me. A beautiful sapphire surrounded by small diamonds that had been in our family for 3 generations. Later that evening, when Tiffany was in the bathroom, I mentioned it to Jackson. "Your grandmother's ring is in my jewelry box. It's yours if you would like to give it to Tiffany." He smiled uncomfortably. "Thanks, Mom, but Tiffany had her heart set on this specific setting and stone. She is very particular about what she likes." When they announced a fall wedding date just 9 months away, I was excited to finally be involved in something important in Jackson's new life. I called him the next day, eager to help with planning. "Of course I want your input, Mom," he said. "But Tiffany's parents are handling most of the arrangements since they're covering a lot of the costs." Over the next few weeks, I called several times asking about venues and dates for cake tastings or dress shopping. Each time, Jackson assured me they would include me soon, but they were still in the early stages of planning. I later discovered through Tiffany's social media posts that they had already selected a venue, a caterer, and even the flowers. The one planning call I was invited to join quickly turned uncomfortable. When I suggested a beautiful state park pavilion for the rehearsal dinner, one that overlooked the lake and wouldn't break anyone's budget, Tiffany laughed. "Oh, Annalise, we are way beyond parks and pavilions. Her father has already reserved the private dining room at LeBlanc. It is the most exclusive restaurant in the city." I tried again. "Perhaps I could help address the invitations. I have been told I have lovely handwriting." Tiffany's voice was cool and dismissive. "We are using a professional calligrapher, Annalise. This isn't a backyard barbecue. We have standards to maintain." Each time she shot down one of my suggestions, I looked to Jackson through the video call, waiting for him to defend me, or at least acknowledge my feelings. Instead, he would change the subject or suddenly remember another call he had to take. One evening, scrolling through Facebook, I saw photos of Tiffany and her mother at a bridal salon trying on wedding dresses. I hadn't even been told about the appointment. When I called Jackson in tears, he sounded distracted. "It was a last-minute thing, Mom. They had a cancellation and Tiffany's mom was already in town. We will schedule another appointment for you to see the dress she chose." That appointment never happened. In fact, as the months passed, I found myself increasingly on the outside of all wedding planning. I wasn't included in the save-the-date photos they sent out. My name was listed as Annalise Wilson rather than Annalise Prescott on the few planning emails I did receive, as if they couldn't even be bothered to get my name right. My best friend Dorothy tried to comfort me. "Some girls just dream of planning their wedding with their mother," she said one evening over coffee at my kitchen table. "You raised a son. It's different." But I knew it wasn't just that. I was being deliberately excluded. The question was, why? The answer came 4 months before the wedding, when Jackson called, sounding stressed. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something." He explained that the wedding costs were spiraling out of control. Tiffany's parents had insisted on the most exclusive venue in Chicago, a famous chef for the catering and custom everything. The bill was approaching $90,000. "I can't afford my share, Mom," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I'm already in credit card debt just from the engagement ring. Tiffany's parents are covering 60%, but I'm expected to cover the rest. That's still over $35,000. My heart sank. I had around $40,000 in my retirement account. It was all I had managed to save after putting Jackson through college. At 65, I was already worried it wouldn't be enough for my retirement. "I will help you," I said without hesitation. "How much do you need?" The relief in his voice was palpable. "Could you cover $35,000, just until I get my year-end bonus and some investments pay off? I promise I will pay you back every cent." I agreed immediately, though I knew in my heart I would likely never see that money again. The next day, I visited my financial advisor and initiated the withdrawal, paying the early penalty fees, since I wasn't yet at full retirement age. When I called Jackson to let him know the money would be transferred to his account, he put me on speaker so Tiffany could hear. I wanted to thank her parents for their generosity and let them know I was happy to contribute. Instead of gratitude, Tiffany's voice was cool and businesslike. "Thank you for contributing your fair share, Annalise." My parents were concerned about having to cover Jackson's portion as well as ours. Fair share, I had just emptied my entire retirement account, and she was talking as if I was merely fulfilling an obligation rather than making an enormous sacrifice. Jackson quickly changed the subject, but the message was clear. My contribution was expected, not appreciated. As the wedding date approached, communication became increasingly sparse. I would go days without hearing from Jackson, and when I did reach him, our conversations were brief and distracted. 6 months before the wedding, I noticed photos on Facebook of a bridal shower. Beautiful table settings, elegantly dressed women, and Tiffany in the center opening gifts. I hadn't been invited. When I called Jackson hurt and confused, he sounded uncomfortable. "It was more of a work thing, Mom. Tiffany's mother organized it with her colleagues and friends. It wasn't a traditional bridal shower." But the photos showed gifts being opened, games being played. It looked very much like a traditional bridal shower to me, one from which the mother of the groom had been deliberately excluded. "I'm sure there was just an oversight with the invitation," Jackson said quickly. "Or maybe it got lost in the mail." We both knew that wasn't true. In this age of digital communication, nothing simply gets lost in the mail without a follow-up text or email. I was not wanted there, and my son didn't have the courage to admit it. The next blow came when I went shopping for my mother of the groom dress. I had saved for months to afford something special, wanting to look my best on Jackson's big day. I chose a lovely navy blue dress with a matching jacket, classic and elegant, without being flashy. It cost more than I would normally spend on myself, but this was a once-in-a-lifetime occasion. 2 days after I purchased the dress, an email arrived from Tiffany with the subject line Wedding Color Scheme Guidance. The message informed all wedding party members and family that the approved color palette for the wedding was blush gold and sage green. Navy blue was specifically listed as a color to avoid, as it would clash with the photography aesthetic. I stared at the screen in disbelief. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Someone must have told Tiffany about my dress choice, and rather than speaking to me directly, she had sent this passive-aggressive email. The return policy at the boutique where I'd purchased the dress only allowed exchanges, not refunds. I would have to buy a second dress I couldn't afford. That weekend, while browsing social media, I came across photos of Jackson and his friends on what was clearly a bachelor party weekend in Las Vegas. In one photo, he was wearing a sash that said, "Final Weekend of Freedom." I hadn't even known it was happening. Similarly, I discovered through a tag that Tiffany had had her bachelorette party in Miami the same weekend. At church that Sunday, I ran into Paula Henderson, whose son had gotten married the previous year. We chatted about the wedding preparations, and I found myself holding back tears as she described being included in every aspect of her son's wedding, from cake tastings to helping choose the first dance song. "Did you help plan the rehearsal dinner?" she asked innocently. "I'm not involved in the planning," I admitted, trying to keep my voice steady. "Tiffany's family is handling everything." Paula looked surprised. "But you're the mother of the groom. Traditionally, the rehearsal dinner is your responsibility to plan." I hadn't even been told where the rehearsal dinner would be held, let alone invited to plan it. The realization that I was being denied even the traditional role of the groom's mother hit me hard. As the wedding date grew closer, my anxiety increased. What would my role be? Would I even be acknowledged I had contributed a significant amount of money toward this wedding money? I could not afford to give, yet I was being treated as an afterthought. 2 months before the wedding, the formal invitation finally arrived. I tore open the thick cream envelope, eagerly running my fingers over the embossed gold lettering. Then I saw it. My name on the envelope, Mrs. Annalise Presley. They had misspelled my last name. After 31 years of being Jackson's mother, his fiancée couldn't even be bothered to get my name right. I called Jackson immediately. His response cut deeper than the mistake itself. "It's just a printer error, Mom. Don't make a big deal about it. Tiffany has been under a lot of stress with the planning." Yet somehow I doubted her parents' names had been misspelled, or those of her friends and colleagues. The error felt deliberate, another subtle way of communicating that I was not important enough to get right. Despite everything, I wanted to give them a special wedding gift. I spent evenings writing and rewriting a heartfelt letter, sharing my hopes for their marriage and the wisdom I had gained over the years. I enclosed a check for $15,000 money I had secretly set aside from tutoring jobs over the past 6 months, often skipping meals to save every possible dollar. Just 1 week before the wedding, Jackson called with an unexpected request. Mom, Tiffany, and I were hoping to upgrade our honeymoon package to include the private island excursion, but we're a bit short. Could you possibly help us out? My bank account was nearly empty after the dress purchase and other wedding-related expenses, but I couldn't bear to disappoint my son. "How much do you need?" I asked. "About $10,000, he said, as if requesting lunch money. "We would be so grateful. It would really make our honeymoon special." I agreed, though it meant I would need to take out a small loan against my house. That night, I revised the wedding card, increasing the check amount to $25,000. My entire life savings was now going toward this wedding and honeymoon. But Jackson was my only child, and I told myself it was worth every penny to secure his happiness. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled at LeBlanc, just as Tiffany had mentioned months earlier. I arrived 15 minutes early, nervous but excited to finally be included in a wedding event. The restaurant was even more exclusive than I had imagined, with a doorman who checked names against a list before allowing entry. Inside, crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings, and the soft notes of a live pianist filled the air. I felt immediately out of place in my new sage green dress that had stretched my credit card to its limit. The hostess led me through the main dining room to a private area in the back where the wedding party was gathering. Tiffany's parents were already holding court her father in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary, her mother draped in designer wear with diamonds at her neck and ears. When I approached to introduce myself, Mrs. Lancaster extended her hand limply. "Ah, Jackson's mother," she said, not using my name at all. "How nice that you could make it. We were just discussing the summer house we've offered the kids for their first anniversary. Do you have a vacation property?" Before I could answer, she had already turned away to greet another guest, leaving me standing awkwardly alone. Mr. Lancaster gave me a brief nod, but was equally quick to turn his attention elsewhere. As more guests arrived, I noticed I was the only one not being introduced around. Jackson was busy with Tiffany, both of them surrounded by friends I had never met. When dinner was finally announced, I discovered I had been seated at the far end of the room at a table with distant cousins of the bride and a couple of the venue's staff members. The main wedding party, including Jackson, sat at a large central table, laughing and toasting throughout the meal. During a brief lull in the conversation, I overheard Tiffany speaking to her bridesmaids at the next table. I had no choice about including Jackson's baggage in the wedding. Her mother insisted we had to at least pretend to include her, or it would look bad to the extended family. Baggage. That's what I was to my future daughter-in-law. Not family. Not even a person deserving of basic respect. Baggage. After the main course, Tiffany's father stood and clinked his glass. "It's time for some toasts to the happy couple," he announced. He gave an elaborate speech about his daughter's accomplishments and how Jackson was lucky to have won her heart. Tiffany's mother followed with an emotional tribute to their daughter. Then the best man and maid of honor both spoke. Assuming I would be next, I stood up with my prepared notes in hand. Before I could speak, Mr. Lancaster quickly announced, "And now let's hear from the groom." I remained standing for an awkward moment, then slowly sat back down as Jackson took the microphone. He hadn't even looked in my direction. The message was clear: I was not meant to speak at this dinner despite being the mother of the groom. After the formal toasts concluded, I made my way to the small bar in the corner, fighting back tears. A hand touched my shoulder, and I turned to find Michael Jackson's childhood best friend. "Mrs. Prescott," he said, using my correct name. A small kindness that nearly broke me. "It's good to see you. I've missed your chocolate chip cookies and Sunday afternoon movies." Michael had practically lived at our house during Jackson's high school years. His own parents were often absent, and he had found a second home with us. We chatted for a few minutes about his job as a physical therapist and his recent engagement. Then, lowering his voice, he asked, "Are you okay with all this?" I never thought Jackson would end up with someone like Tiffany. They seem so different from how he used to be. I wanted to pour out my heart to this young man who had once been like a second son to me. I wanted to tell him how excluded and hurt I felt. Instead, I simply said, "Jackson is an adult making his own choices. I just want him to be happy." Michael gave me a long look. "If you ever need anything, Mrs. Prescott, I'm still in town. My mom still has your number." His kindness was almost my undoing. I excused myself to the restroom where I finally let the tears flow. After composing myself, I returned to find the party breaking up. Jackson was already leaving with Tiffany and her parents. He gave me a quick hug and promised to see me at the church tomorrow. Back in my hotel room, I cried for hours. The wall between my son and me seemed insurmountable now. Whatever Tiffany's issues with me were, they had infected my relationship with Jackson to the point where he couldn't even see how I was being treated. Or worse, he saw and didn't care. I considered not attending the wedding at all. The thought of facing more humiliation was almost unbearable. But then I remembered the day Jackson was born, how I had held his tiny body against my chest and promised to love him unconditionally for all of my days. I couldn't break that promise, even if he seemed to have forgotten his connection to me. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear. I woke early, determined that today would be different. Today was about Jackson, about celebrating the child I had raised becoming a married man. I would maintain my dignity and focus on my love for my son regardless of how I was treated. I added a final $10,000 to the wedding gift check, bringing the total to $35,000, the same amount I had already contributed to the wedding costs. My entire life savings was now going to Jackson and Tiffany. I wrote in the card, "My dearest Jackson, from your first steps to this momentous step today, I have loved you with all my heart. Marriage is built on respect, kindness, and mutual support. May you and Tiffany create a home filled with the same love and acceptance I have always tried to give you. All my love always, Mom." I sealed the envelope, placed it carefully in my purse, and prepared to face whatever the day might bring. I spent the morning getting ready in my hotel room, taking extra care with my hair and makeup. While applying my lipstick, my phone chimed with a notification. It was a social media update from one of Tiffany's bridesmaids, showing the bridal party getting ready together in a luxurious suite. Champagne flutes and elaborate breakfast platters surrounded them as a professional makeup artist worked on Tiffany's face. I quickly turned off my phone, not wanting to spoil my fragile good mood. The church was a historic downtown cathedral, with soaring stained glass windows and marble columns. I arrived an hour early, hoping to see Jackson before the ceremony began. The church was already bustling with florists, adding final touches to elaborate arrangements of white roses and greenery that adorned every pew and archway. I approached a woman with a clipboard who I assumed was the wedding planner. "I'm Annalise Prescott Jackson's mother," I said. "Could you tell me where I might find him before the ceremony?" She consulted her clipboard with a frown. "I'm sorry, but the groom is only seeing the wedding party right now. Family will connect after the ceremony." Her tone made it clear that this was non-negotiable. Deflated but determined to remain positive, I took a seat in the nearly empty sanctuary, watching the final preparations. The flowers alone must have cost thousands. Crystal vases caught the light from the windows, sending rainbows dancing across the marble floor. A string quartet was setting up in the corner, tuning their instruments for the processional music. Gradually, the church filled with guests in designer clothes and expensive jewelry. An usher eventually approached me. "Are you with the bride or groom?" he asked. "I'm the groom's mother," I replied. He looked momentarily confused, as if this information wasn't in his instructions. Eventually, he led me to a seat in the front row on the right side where I sat alone, while Tiffany's side filled with family members who chatted comfortably with each other. When the music began and the bridal party started their procession, I craned my neck to catch my first glimpse of Jackson. There he was, my son, handsome in his tuxedo, with his hair neatly combed and his face serious with the importance of the moment. For a brief second, our eyes met, and I saw a flicker of the little boy who used to run to me with skinned knees and treasured discoveries. Then he looked away, focused on the altar where he would soon be married. Tiffany was undeniably beautiful in her designer gown, with its cathedral-length train and delicate beading that caught the light with every movement. Her father walked proudly beside her, his chest puffed out like a peacock. When they reached the altar and the minister asked, "Who gives this woman to be married?" her father's voice rang out clear and strong. "Her mother and I do." Throughout the ceremony, I found myself torn between pride in seeing my son take this adult step and an acute awareness of my exclusion from the celebration. Neither Jackson nor Tiffany had asked me for any input on the ceremony, readings, or music. There was no mention of me in any part of the service, no acknowledgement of my role in raising the man who stood at the altar. When they were pronounced husband and wife, I clapped along with everyone else, genuine tears of emotion in my eyes. Whatever my feelings about Tiffany or how I had been treated, this was still my son's wedding day. I wanted it to be perfect for him. After the ceremony, the photographer began arranging people for formal pictures. I stood off to the side, waiting to be called. After capturing several combinations of the bridal party, the photographer finally said, "Now let's get one with the groom's mother." I stepped forward eagerly, happy to finally be included. The photographer positioned me at the very edge of the group, so far to the side that I wondered if I would even be visible in the final image. 5 quick shots, and I was dismissed with a, "Okay, we're done with you," while the bridal party continued with dozens more poses and combinations. The reception was held at the Grand Meridian, Chicago's most exclusive hotel. The ballroom had been transformed into a fantasy garden, with living trees strung with thousands of fairy lights, hanging floral installations and tables adorned with golden candelabras and hand-painted china. A 16-piece orchestra played softly as guests found their assigned seats. I searched for my name among the elegant place cards at the front tables reserved for family. Not finding it, I approached the seating chart display near the entrance. I finally located my name at table 19, the furthest table from the head table where Jackson and Tiffany would sit. I was placed with distant acquaintances of Tiffany's family, not even close to any of Jackson's friends or relatives who had attended. As I made my way to my assigned table, I passed Michael, who was seated at table 3 with other childhood friends of Jackson. He gave me a sympathetic look but was engaged in conversation with his table mates. At my own table, I introduced myself to the other guests, most of whom seemed surprised to learn I was the groom's mother. "Aren't you sitting at the family table?" one woman asked innocently. "I appears not," I replied, trying to keep my voice light. "I suspect there wasn't enough room." But the woman frowned, looking toward the front of the room. "The entire left side of the head table is Tiffany's extended family. Her second cousins are seated closer than you." I changed the subject quickly, not wanting to draw attention to the deliberate slight. Throughout the extravagant cocktail hour, I watched as Tiffany's parents worked the room, introducing guests to each other with practiced charm. When they reached our table with Jackson and Tiffany in tow, Mrs. Lancaster gestured vaguely in my direction. "And this is Jackson's mom," she said, not bothering with my name. Her tone suggested she was pointing out a service provider rather than a family member. Jackson gave me a quick hug, but before I could say more than hello, Tiffany's hand was on his arm, pulling him away to meet some important business connection of her father's. I was left mid-sentence watching my son's back as he moved to the next table. The dinner was a 7-course gourmet experience, with wine pairings for each course and elaborately plated dishes that looked like works of art. At my table, conversation was polite but stilted. I was clearly an outsider to this wealthy crowd, with their talk of European vacations and country club memberships. From my distant vantage point, I watched Jackson during the first dance with his new wife. He had always been a natural dancer, something I had discovered when teaching him to waltz in our living room before his first middle school dance. I had stood on his feet counting out the steps while he giggled and protested that boys didn't need to know how to dance. Now he moved confidently across the floor with Tiffany, his hand resting lightly on her waist, just as I had taught him. For just a moment watching him dance, I felt a pure, uncomplicated pride. Whatever was happening between us, whatever Tiffany's issues with me were, I had raised a good man. I had done that despite all the challenges of single parenthood, despite the financial struggles and the lonely nights. In that moment, I allowed myself to feel successful as a mother. As the evening progressed, I noticed Tiffany becoming increasingly intoxicated. Her movements grew less graceful, her laugh louder and more frequent. She clung to Jackson, possessively whispering in his ear and shooting glares at any woman who approached him, even elderly relatives offering congratulations. During a brief lull in the dancing, I decided to make another attempt to speak with Jackson properly. I approached the head table where he was momentarily alone, Tiffany having gone to the restroom with her bridesmaids. "The wedding is beautiful, Jackson," I said sincerely. "You look so happy, and that's all I've ever wanted for you." He smiled, a genuine smile that reminded me of the boy he had once been. "Thanks, Mom. I'm glad you could be here." Before I could say more, Tiffany returned, her eyes narrowing when she saw me standing with Jackson. She quickly inserted herself between us, her back partially turned to me as she addressed her new husband. "Darling, Daddy is about to make the investment announcement. We need to prepare our response." Jackson's face shifted instantly from relaxed to anxious. "Right, of course." He turned to me apologetically. "Mom, I need to—" But Tiffany interrupted, her voice carrying a sharp edge that hadn't been there a moment before. "Jackson doesn't have time for this right now. This is our wedding, not a family reunion." I stepped back, stung by her rudeness. "I just wanted a moment with my son on his wedding day. Is that too much to ask?" Tiffany's face flushed with either alcohol or anger, possibly both. "Actually, yes, it is too much to ask. This day isn't about you." Jackson placed a hand on her arm. "Tiff, let's just calm down and—" She shook off his hand, her voice rising. "No, I'm tired of pretending. Your mother has been sulking all day because she's not the center of attention." People at nearby tables were beginning to turn and stare. I felt the heat of embarrassment creeping up my neck, but I kept my voice level. "I haven't been sulking, Tiffany. I've been excluded from virtually every aspect of this wedding, despite contributing a significant amount to its cost." Tiffany's eyes flashed with a dangerous light. She turned suddenly and signaled to the DJ, who cut the music mid-song. The abrupt silence fell heavy across the ballroom as hundreds of conversations died away and all eyes turned toward us. Tiffany grabbed a microphone from the DJ's table and stepped into the center of the dance floor. "May I have everyone's attention, please?" She called out her words, slightly slurred but clear enough. "I have something important to say." Jackson moved toward her, alarm written across his face. "Tiffany, what are you doing?" She ignored him, turning to point directly at me. "For those of you who don't know, that woman there is Jackson's mother. She's been trying to undermine our relationship and this wedding from day one." A collective gasp went through the crowd. I stood frozen in place, unable to believe what was happening. "You're not welcome here, old lady." Tiffany continued, her voice cruel and hard. "You never were. This is my day, my wedding, my husband. I've tolerated your presence for Jackson's sake, but I'm done pretending." The silence in the room was absolute. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me witnessing my humiliation. My hand instinctively clutched my purse, feeling the outline of the envelope containing the $35,000 check I had planned to give them. I looked to Jackson, waiting for him to defend me to stop this public attack on his mother. But he stood with his eyes fixed on the floor, his shoulders hunched, saying nothing. In that moment, I saw with perfect clarity what our relationship had become. My son, the boy I had sacrificed everything for, couldn't even look up to defend me against this cruelty. Something shifted inside me then. A lifetime of putting others first, of accepting disrespect, to keep the peace, of sacrificing my needs for my son's happiness, suddenly felt like a weight I could no longer bear. I felt heat rise, not from embarrassment now, but from a long, dormant anger. With a calm I didn't know I possessed, I walked onto the dance floor. Tiffany's eyes widened in surprise as I gently took the microphone from her hand. "Thank you for making your feelings so clear, Tiffany," I said, my voice steady and carrying to every corner of the silent room. "I think it's important that everyone here knows exactly where we stand." I turned to face the sea of shocked faces. "I came here today not as an unwelcome guest, but as the woman who gave everything for her son. I worked 3 jobs to put you through college, Jackson. I emptied my retirement account to pay for this wedding. I took out a loan against my house to fund your honeymoon. I was prepared today to give you the last of my savings as a wedding gift." I opened my purse and removed the envelope, holding it up for everyone to see. "But I cannot buy your respect or your bride's decency. That apparently is beyond my means." With deliberate movements, I tore the check into small pieces, letting them flutter to the floor like confetti. The gasps and murmurs from the guests created a wave of sound that washed over me. "Love isn't measured in dollar amounts or fancy receptions," I continued. "It's measured in respect, in kindness, in standing up for those who have stood by you. I have always loved you unconditionally, Jackson, and I always will. But I will no longer accept being treated as an embarrassment or an inconvenience." Tiffany was sputtering now, her face contorted with rage. Mr. Lancaster started forward, but his wife held him back, perhaps sensing that any intervention would only make the situation worse for their daughter. Jackson finally looked up, his face pale with shock. "Mom, please," he began, taking a step toward me. I held up my hand to stop him. "No, Jackson. You've made your choice. You stood silent while your wife humiliated the woman who raised you. That tells me everything I need to know." I handed the microphone back to the stunned DJ and walked with my head held high toward the exit. As I passed the tables, I noticed several of the older guests nodding in approval. Michael stood up as I passed, a gesture of respect that brought tears to my eyes. A few others followed his example, including, surprisingly, Tiffany's grandmother. I didn't look back as I left the ballroom, the weight of decades finally lifting from my shoulders. For the first time in years, possibly since Jackson was born, I was putting myself first. It hurt, like tearing off a bandage that had grown into the skin. But underneath the pain was something unexpected: freedom. The drive home that night was both the longest and most liberating journey of my life. I alternated between sobbing so hard I had to pull over and feeling a strange, buoyant relief. My phone buzzed constantly with messages and missed calls from Jackson, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. What was there left to say? By the time I reached my small house, exhaustion had overtaken the adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation. I kicked off my shoes still in my sage green dress and fell into bed without even removing my makeup. I slept for 14 hours straight, the deep sleep of someone who has finally put down a burden they've carried too long. The next morning, I woke to dozens of missed calls and texts from Jackson. His messages evolved from angry, "How could you embarrass us like that?" to defensive, "You don't understand how hard this has been for me," to finally desperately apologetic, "Please call me back, Mom. I'm so sorry." I read them all, but responded to none. For once, my son would have to sit with the consequences of his actions without me rushing in to make everything better. Dorothy came over with coffee and muffins, having heard about the wedding drama from her nephew, who had been a server at the reception. The story was apparently the talk of the catering staff. She sat with me at my kitchen table, the same place we had shared countless conversations over 30 years of friendship. "You know what amazes me," she said, stirring cream into her coffee. "Not that you finally stood up for yourself, though I'm damn proud of you for that. What amazes me is how long you tolerated being treated so poorly. The Annalise I knew in college would have never put up with that." She was right. Somewhere along the way, in the process of being a single mother, of always putting Jackson first, I had lost sight of my own worth. I had become so accustomed to making sacrifices that I had forgotten I deserved basic respect and consideration. Over the next week, as Jackson's calls continued unanswered, other friends reached out. My colleague from the math department brought dinner. My neighbor John, a widower who had always been kind but distant, offered to mow my lawn after noticing I hadn't been out much. Michael Jackson's childhood friend stopped by with his fiancée, bringing a homemade chocolate cake and genuine concern. I was discovering that while I had focused all my emotional energy on Jackson for decades, I had a community around me that cared. People who valued me not for what I could give them, but simply for who I was. 7 days after the wedding, there was a knock at my door. I knew before opening it that it would be Jackson. He stood on my porch alone without Tiffany, looking disheveled and exhausted. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice hoarse. I stepped aside to let him in, noticing how he seemed to have aged years in just a week. We sat in the living room where I had once read him bedtime stories and bandaged scraped knees. "Mom, I am so sorry," he began. "What Tiffany did was inexcusable. What I did or didn't do was worse. I should have stopped her. I should have defended you." I remained silent, letting him continue without the reassurances I would have rushed to provide in the past. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," he said, running his hands through his hair. "But I want you to know that I've told Tiffany she needs to apologize to you properly in person, and we'll pay back every cent you contributed to the wedding." I studied my son's face, seeing both the man he had become and the boy he had been. "When I've been hurt by someone I trust, I need more than words to heal that breach," I said finally. "I need to see consistent change in behavior." He nodded rapidly. "Anything, Mom. Whatever it takes. I need time, Jackson. Time away from you and especially from Tiffany. I need to focus on myself for once, on what I want and need. I've spent over 30 years putting you first. Now it's my turn." His face crumpled, but he nodded again. "I understand. Just please don't shut me out forever. I can't lose you, Mom." As he left, promising to respect my wishes for space, I felt a complex mix of sadness and hope. The relationship might eventually be repaired, but it would never be the same. Perhaps that wasn't entirely bad. In the weeks that followed, I began the process of rediscovering myself. I joined a support group for parents estranged from adult children, finding comfort in stories both better and worse than my own. I reconnected with college friends I hadn't seen in years. I pulled out my old watercolor set and began painting again, something I had loved before motherhood consumed my identity. Dorothy convinced me to join her on a weekend trip to the coast, my first vacation in over a decade. Standing on the beach at sunrise, watching the waves crash against the shore, I felt a sense of possibility I hadn't experienced since my youth. I was 65 years old, but my life wasn't over. In many ways, a new chapter was just beginning. 3 months after the wedding disaster, a letter arrived from Jackson. Unlike his texts and calls, which had eventually tapered off, as I requested this was handwritten on proper stationery, he wrote of his shame at how he had allowed me to be treated not just at the wedding but in the years since meeting Tiffany. He acknowledged that he had been seeking acceptance from her family at the cost of the unconditional love I had always provided. The final paragraph brought tears to my eyes. I don't know if our relationship can ever be what it once was, but I hope we can build something new, something based on mutual respect. I am in counseling now, working to understand why I was so desperate for approval that I sacrificed the most important relationship in my life. I love you, Mom, and I am truly sorry for the pain I caused you. I called him that evening and we spoke for hours. I set clear boundaries. I would meet with him monthly, but not with Tiffany present. Any financial discussions were off limits. He would need to manage his own money from now on. And most importantly, I would no longer tolerate being treated as an afterthought in his life. To my surprise, he accepted these terms without argument. During our first lunch together, he confided that his marriage was already showing strain. Tiffany's behavior at the wedding had revealed aspects of her character he could no longer ignore. I listened without offering advice, a new approach for me. As months passed, I continued my journey of self-discovery. I volunteered teaching math to adults, pursuing their GEDs, finding purpose and helping others overcome obstacles. I redecorated my house, painting the walls colors I loved rather than the neutral tones I had chosen with resale value in mind. I even went on several dinner dates with John from next door, enjoying male companionship without expectations or pressure. My relationship with Jackson slowly evolved into something different, but perhaps healthier than before. He was learning to see me as a complete person with my own needs and desires, not just as his mother. I was learning that loving him didn't mean always being available or always putting his needs first. Throughout this journey, I came to understand a fundamental truth. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to walk away from people who don't value you even when they're the ones you love most. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's essential for healthy relationships. And it's never too late to start prioritizing your own well-being. Today, I still have moments of sadness about what happened at the wedding. But mostly I feel grateful for the wake-up call it provided. It took Tiffany's public cruelty and Jackson's silent complicity to shake me out of decades of self-sacrifice. In the most painful way possible, they gave me the push I needed to reclaim my life. If you're watching this and recognizing yourself in my story, if you've spent years putting everyone else first only to be taken for granted or treated poorly, know that it's not too late to change. You deserve respect. You deserve consideration. You deserve love that doesn't require you to make yourself smaller. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you loved for your own well-being? Share your story in the comments below. And if my journey resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to hear more true stories of finding strength in difficult times. Remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is not "I love you," but "I respect myself too much to accept this treatment." Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to stand up for yourself when it matters most.